Okay, good morning, class. Here I am again in my house, my study, and I hope everyone is doing okay. I know some of you might be scared, but don't worry. This is not Europe in 1348 or the Americas in 1519. We will manage everything, we will get through it. I hope that you're safe. I hope that you are taking care of yourselves. And please let me know and that everyone is. So check in, please. Well, all right. So today I want to talk about industrialization and expand it a little further. We talked about the beginnings of industrialization in textiles in the 1780s, 1790s, and how Great Britain dominated both textiles and then further industrialization in other industries, coal, steel, steam powered factories were developed. Again, remember the definition of the Industrial Revolution. It was the period when artificial sources of power replaced human and animal energy to power or to energize industry. So economic processes changed and became much more dependent on artificial means of power, and therefore production could be increased, and it did not depend on the cycles of the year. It could be brought inside eventually and brought together, concentrated in large factories that would produce much more than any private individual working by themselves could ever hope to achieve. So Adam Smith, we talked about as the father of laissez-faire capitalism, and his book, The Wealth of Nations, and basically explored how the wealth of nations was an example of Enlightenment thinking and its application to economic issues, economic production. That is, Adam Smith argued that there were natural laws, they were invisible, they were the laws of supply and demand that would work efficiently, most efficiently, if left alone, therefore laissez faire, leave it alone, and that if these were allowed to function without any government interference, they would produce the best results economically. He also believed that a human characteristic of self-interest, that is, people worked for their own benefit and the benefit of their families, would kind of set the natural laws working automatically, and that this would ultimately benefit all of us. All right. David Ricardo is another of these Enlightenment thinkers that became very prominent, very important in the early period of industrialization. David Ricardo wrote his Political Economy in 1819, and he was a supporter of free trade. He argued for something known as comparative advantage. I am going to talk about comparative advantage, so I want you to pay attention. Comparative advantage says that one should not try to produce everything. One should produce what it can make best and most efficiently, most economically efficient, and then buy from others what they make most efficiently. He used the example of wine and textiles. He said that the British could produce textiles much more efficiently than the Portuguese. Therefore, they should produce textiles and sell that to the Portuguese while buying from the Portuguese wine, because the Portuguese could manufacture wine more efficiently than the British. That's comparative advantage, and it argues for free trade, no tariffs, no barriers in trading. That is a very important idea, and it began to dominate certain political parties in Great Britain primarily, who were free trade, primarily the liberals under Gladstone. Well, um, David Ricardo is very, very important. We should know him. We should know Adam Smith. We will now talk about the idea of industrialization as a positive. We've heard that, we know the critiques of capitalism, and we'll talk about those, and we'll talk about the critiques of industrialization. But first, I like to talk about the benefits of industrialization and some of the arguments in favor of it. Well, one of the principal arguments in favor of industrialization is that in the switch to artificial power and non-natural cycles, that is, you could continuously work to produce, did achieve its purpose. That is, production increased exponentially. That is, it increased to levels that had not been seen before. It did concentrate wealth, but at the same time, some of this wealth got to the working class. For example, in Britain, by 1850, a industrial worker was paid about 30 pounds per year, per annum. A agricultural worker in France was paid 21 pounds, the equivalent of 21 pounds, so much less. And a worker in one of the several German states was paid 13 pounds. So it did benefit the working class in terms of overall wages. Andrew Urey, and you'll see him in the PowerPoint, talked about the other benefits of industrialization, that is, the technological advancements that industrialization was making and had made, and he argued that this would lift humankind from the pre-modern conditions to a modern, technologically advanced civilization, and ultimately help all human beings. Andrew Urey was a proponent of industrialization. So generally, the idea that industrialization increased production, increased wealth, yes, it concentrated wealth in the hands of some, and it did not extend that kind of level of wealth to everyone, but it did improve at least the financial situation for many workers, particularly by the 1850s. So that's generally where we are on a positive side of industrialization. So let's look at the criticisms. As you can see in the PowerPoint, the early critics of industrialization are found in the Romantic movement. But even Metternich, and you remember Metternich from our previous lectures, remember the arch conservative, the coachman of Europe, the individual that saw the devil's work in constitutions and liberalism. He opposed industrialization. He opposed capitalism as unnatural because he had a Catholic point of view, that is a point of view that had not been, even in Germany, displaced by the Protestant ethic. In Germany, for example, noblemen could not engage in trade, could not engage in commerce, and therefore would not engage in any kind of industrialization until much later. While in Britain, that was not the case. So Britain had that advantage, as we talked about before. So there was a traditional criticism of industrialization and capitalism. But the strongest early critique of industrialization and capitalism comes from the Romantics. Basically, in that context, I want to focus on the work of Mary Shelley Godwin. Mary Shelley Godwin was the daughter of William Godwin and Mary Wollstonecraft, the early feminist writer who wrote on the vindication of the rights of women. Well, Mary Wollstonecraft Shelley wrote Frankenstein. And Frankenstein has been seen by many, and there is a suggestion that Mary Shelley saw it this way, as a uh, critique, an allegorical, an allusion, an allegorical critique of industrialization. That is, man trying to create a system divorced from natural limits and natural factors, and therefore the monster, particularly in the last chapter, destroys his creator. And Mary Shelley was saying that this is going to happen to a society that industrializes. That is, the monster will escape and will destroy the very creator of the monstrosity. So that industrialization is a monstrosity because it divorces workers and people from nature. So Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, excuse me, Mary Shelley's Frankenstein is a critique in many ways of industrialization. You also have the poem Jerusalem, which is a early romantic poem attacking the factories as the workplaces of Satan. And that Christianity is opposed to capitalism. That poem, Jerusalem, if you can take a look at it, you can see how the author tried to bring together his critique of industrialization along with his religious views. Well, that's the romantic critique. And then by 1848, you have the socialist critique. Early socialists are known as utopian socialists. Marx would call them romantics and would not approve of their work or their thinking. But these were early important critics of industrialization. People like Henri Saint-Simon, Fourier, Charles Fourier, and Louis Blanc are very, very important. There is also Robert Owen as an important early utopian socialist. These utopian socialists did not want to sweep away capitalism. They wanted to reform it, to control it, to limit it. And therefore, they wanted government regulations to limit the extent to which governments could, to allow governments to regulate capitalism and regulate economic activities. So these utopian socialists wanted to work within within capitalism, but control it, but limit it, have government regulations applied to the workplace, the factories. An early example of this attempt, not by socialists, but by the government, independent of social criticism, is the Sadler Commission. And you have some of the reports of the Sadler Commission in the PowerPoint. And I urge you to look at it and see how difficult conditions were in early factory work in Great Britain. And the Sadler Commission looked into the conditions in early factories, took testimony, and actually passed some legislation that to benefit the workers. This is also part and parcel of the utilitarian movement. People like Jeremy Bentham and John Stuart Mill developed an ideology that became rather important in Great Britain, and it's known as utilitarianism. You have to know that. Utilitarianism argues that government should act for to guarantee the greatest benefit for the greatest number. The idea is that government is bound to act to protect the welfare of most people, and that this is a legitimate function of government, so it divorces itself from laissez-faire capitalism. And over time, liberalism would be split into two currents. One, basically the laissez-faire current, and we'll call that passive state liberalism, and the other, the utilitarian active state liberalism of John Stuart Mills and Jeremy Bentham, particularly the late Mills. Even today, the whole idea of Bernie Sanders, I know we've talked about him as a socialist. Well, he really is not, unless you think of him as a utopian socialist. He has not talked about taking over the economy or taking over important industries. He's simply talking about extending government control or government regulation in certain key areas like healthcare. That is, extension of healthcare is more utilitarian than socialist. And therefore, Bernie Sanders should really be seen as an active state liberal, opposed by passive state liberals, generally the Republicans. We'll be talking about Marx tomorrow. So please be on. Get to see this lecture and work on the PowerPoint as much as you can. I hope everybody is safe, and I hope everyone stays safe, and I hope to see everybody again soon. Bye.